A homeless man pays for an elderly woman's pastries after she's kicked out of a bakery, and the next day he's surrounded by people in suits. The sun had barely risen over the city skyline when Jack Thompson awoke, feeling the cold pavement against his back. Beside him, curled up under a tattered blanket, slept his 10-year-old daughter, Emily. Jack observed her for a moment, marveling at how, even in the harshest circumstances, she maintained that peaceful expression on her face. "Good morning, my little warrior," whispered Jack, gently stroking Emily's hair. The girl slowly opened her eyes, blinking in the dawn light. "Good morning, Dad," she replied with a sleepy smile. "Is today the day?" Jack nodded, remembering the promise he had made to his daughter. Today they would try to buy a fresh loaf of bread from the neighborhood bakery, a luxury they could rarely afford. Yes, sweetheart, today's the day. As they gathered their few belongings, Jack couldn't help feeling a pang of guilt. How had they ended up like this? Just 3 years ago, they had a roof over their heads and food on the table. But life can take unexpected turns, and a series of bad investments and wrong decisions had left them with nothing. They walked through the city streets, Jack greeting other homeless people he knew, sharing that silent camaraderie of those who understand the weight of living on the margins of society. Emily, for her part, looked at everything with curious eyes, finding beauty in the small details that most people overlooked. A bird building its nest, a flower growing between the cracks in the pavement. When they reached the corner of Main Street, Jack stopped at his usual spot. He took out a small cardboard box and placed it in front of him, sitting down. On the ground, Emily sat beside him, taking out a worn notebook and a chewed-up pencil. "What are you going to draw today?" asked Jack as the first people began to pass by, some ignoring them, others dropping a few coins in the box. "I'm going to draw our future home," Emily replied with determination. "With a garden full of flowers and a kitchen where you can make your famous spaghetti." Jack felt a lump in his throat. His daughter's unbreakable hope was what kept him going day after day. "It's a beautiful drawing, my love. Someday we'll make it a reality." The hours passed slowly. The sun rose high in the sky, bringing the midday heat. Jack counted the coins in the box. Barely enough to buy a loaf of bread, but it was better than nothing. "Come on, Emily," he said, standing up and stretching his stiff muscles. "It's time to fulfill our promise." They walked to the bakery. The aroma of freshly baked bread filling the air as they approached. Emily gave a little jump of excitement when she saw the cakes in the window display, and Jack had to remind himself that someday he would be able to buy her one. As they entered the bakery, the contrast between their appearance and the cozy atmosphere of the place was evident. Some people looked at them with suspicion, others with pity. Jack squeezed Emily's hand, giving her strength. It was then that they noticed the commotion near the counter. An elderly woman with white hair tied in a tight bun and dressed in worn but clean clothes was arguing with the bakery manager. "I assure you I forgot my wallet at home," the woman was saying, her voice shaky but dignified. "I can come back later to pay, or if you prefer I can wash the dishes in exchange for the coffee and bread I've already consumed." "Tao, manager," a burly man with a flour-stained apron, snorted disdainfully. "Do I look like a fool to you, ma'am? We don't accept beggars here. Either you pay or you leave right now." The old woman paled at the manager's aggressive tone, and Jack felt a pang of empathy. He knew all too well the humiliation of being treated as less than human. Without thinking twice, Jack approached the counter. "I'll pay for what she owes," he said firmly. The manager looked him up and down with contempt. "You don't make me laugh, you can barely feed yourself." Jack felt Emily squeeze his hand and he heard her whisper, "Dad, it's all we have." With a smile full of tenderness, Jack crouched down to look his daughter in the eyes. "Sometimes it's more important to help than to have, my love." Then, turning to the manager, he took the coins out of his pocket. "This should cover what the lady throws and maybe a loaf of bread for us." The old woman, with tears in her eyes, tried to refuse the offer. "I can't accept, you need it more than I do." Jack shook his head. "No one should be treated this way, I've got this." The manager, visibly uncomfortable with the situation, reluctantly took the coins and handed them a loaf of bread. The old woman, still moved, introduced herself. "I'm Margaret Williams. I don't know how to thank you for your kindness. Please let me invite you for coffee at my house so I can repay you." Jack was about to politely decline when Emily tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, can we go? It's been so long since we've had real coffee." Looking at his daughter's hopeful eyes and Margaret's kind expression, Jack nodded. "It would be our pleasure, Mrs. Williams." As they left the bakery, Jack couldn't imagine how this simple act of compassion would change the course of their lives. Fate sometimes has mysterious ways of rewarding kindness. Margaret led them through the city streets, gradually moving away from the bustle of downtown towards a quieter neighborhood. Jack noticed how the houses became larger and better maintained, and he couldn't help feeling a twinge of discomfort. What was a woman who lived in this neighborhood doing, forgetting her wallet in a downtown bakery? "It's here," said Margaret, stopping in front of a two-story house with a small garden in front. The paint was a bit faded, and the garden needed care, but it was still more than Jack and Emily had had in years. As they entered, the aroma of old books and dried flowers enveloped them. Margaret led them to a cozy living room where she invited them to sit on a worn but comfortable sofa. "Please make yourselves at home," said Margaret with a warm smile. "I'll prepare some coffee and maybe I can find some cookies." While Margaret disappeared into the kitchen, Emily looked around with wonder. "Dad, did you see how many books there are? And look at those photos." Jack followed his daughter's gaze to a wall covered with framed photographs. In them he saw a younger Margaret smiling, often accompanied by a kind-looking man and a boy who grew older through the images. Margaret returned with a tray, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the room. "I hope you like it. It's not much, but it's with love." As they shared coffee and cookies, Margaret told them her story. She had been a literature teacher for decades, and her husband, now deceased, had been a respected lawyer. Her son, Anthony, was following in his father's footsteps in the legal world. "But life takes many turns," said Margaret with a sigh. "A few years ago we lost almost everything in a bad investment. My pension is barely enough to maintain this house, which is all we have left from better times." Jack listened attentively, feeling an unexpected connection with this woman who, despite the circumstances, maintained her dignity and kindness. "But tell me about yourselves," said Margaret, looking at Jack and Emily with genuine interest. "How is it that two such kind souls find themselves in such a difficult situation?" Jack hesitated for a moment, but something in Margaret's understanding gaze encouraged him to share. He told them about his past as a small business owner, how he had tried to expand his business with a loan, and how everything had come crashing down when the market collapsed. "We lost the house, the business, everything," said Jack, his voice filled with emotion. "Since then, we've been trying to get by, but it's hard when a society sees you as invisible." Emily, who had been listening in silence, added, "But Dad always says that as long as we're together, we have everything we need." Margaret smiled tenderly at the girl's words. "Your father is a wise man, Emily, and very brave. Not everyone would have done what he did today at the bakery." At that moment, the front door opened, and a middle-aged man, dressed in a suit and tie, entered the living room. "Mom, are you okay? I saw your message and came as fast as I—" The man stopped short when he saw Jack and Emily. "Oh, I didn't know we had visitors." Margaret stood up to greet her son. "Anthony, I'm glad you're here. Let me introduce you to Jack and his daughter Emily. They helped me today in a way you couldn't imagine." As Margaret recounted the events at the bakery, Anthony listened with growing interest, his gaze moving from his mother to Jack and Emily. "It's incredible," said Anthony when Margaret finished her story. "In these times, it's rare to find people willing to help strangers like that." Jack, feeling a bit uncomfortable with the praise, simply said, "Anyone would have done the same." Anthony shook his head. "You're wrong, Jack. Not just anyone would have done it. In fact—" He paused, as if considering something important. "There's something I'd like to talk to you about, if you have a moment." Margaret seemed to understand what her son was thinking. "Emily, dear, would you like to see my book collection while your father and Anthony talk?" Emily's eyes lit up at the proposal, and after receiving a nod from Jack, she followed Margaret to another room. Once alone, Anthony sat across from Jack, his expression serious but kind. "Jack, What you did today for my mother is extraordinary, especially considering your own situation. It's made me think about a project we've had in mind for some time." Jack listened attentively, intrigued by the turn the conversation was taking. "You see," Anthony continued, "my mother has always wanted to do something to help homeless people. We have a property, a large house on the outskirts of the city, that we've been thinking of turning into a shelter. The problem is that we need someone who can manage it, someone who truly understands the needs of people in that situation." Jack felt his heart racing. Was Anthony suggesting what he thought he was? "What I want to propose, Jack, is that you be the one to help us set up and manage that shelter. You'd have a salary, of course, and a place to live with Emily. I know it's sudden and we barely know each other, but something tells me you're the right person for this." Jack was speechless for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Anthony was offering him. It was more than he had dared to dream in years. I don't know what to say," Jack stammered. "It's an incredible opportunity, but are you sure? I mean, it's been years since I've handled anything like a business or administration." Anthony smiled understandingly. "I understand your doubts, Jack, but what we need isn't just someone with administrative skills. We need someone with heart, someone who understands firsthand what it means to be in that situation. And today you've demonstrated exactly the kind of compassion and empathy we're looking for." Jack felt a mix of emotions: hope, fear, gratitude, uncertainty. "I'd need to think about it," he finally said, "and talk it over with Emily. She's my priority in all of this." Anthony nodded understandingly. "Of course, Jack. Take all the time you... I need to think it over. It's an important decision, and I understand that you want to consult with Emily." At that moment, Margaret and Emily returned to the living room, the girl with an old book in her hands and a radiant smile on her face. "Dad, look, Mrs. Williams lent me this storybook. She says I can keep it as long as I want," Emily exclaimed, showing Jack the book. Jack looked at Margaret gratefully. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Williams." Margaret waved her hand, downplaying it. "Please call me Margaret. And it's a pleasure to be able to share the love of reading with this very intelligent young lady." Anthony observed the scene with a smile. "Well, I think it's time for us to go, isn't it, Mum? Jack and Emily need time to talk." Margaret nodded and turned to Jack and Emily. "You've been wonderful company. Please come back whenever you want. And Jack, think about what Anthony has told you. I believe you could make a big difference in many people's lives." As they said goodbye at the door, Jack felt a mix of emotions he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, fear, gratitude, all mingled inside him as he took Emily's hand and they began their journey back to the streets that had been their home for so long. "What did you talk about with Mr. Anthony, Dad?" Emily asked as they walked. Jack took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Well, my love, Mr. Anthony made me a very interesting proposal. He offered us a job and a place to live." Emily's eyes widened. "Really? We wouldn't have to sleep on the street anymore. Could I go to school again?" The excitement in his daughter's voice made Jack feel a lump in his throat. "Yes, honey, that's what they're offering us, but it's a very important decision, and I wanted to talk it over with you first." They stopped at a small park and sat down on a bench. Jack looked into his daughter's eyes, marveling once again at the strength and maturity he saw in them. "Emily, you know I've always tried to teach you the importance of being cautious, of not blindly trusting in the promises of others. We've been through very difficult times, and I don't want us to have false hopes." Emily nodded, her expression serious. "I know, Dad, but you always say we have to have faith, and that things can get better if we don't lose hope." Jack smiled, moved by his little one's wisdom. "You're right, my love, and this could be the opportunity we've been waiting for. But I want you to understand that it won't be easy. I'll have to work very hard and learn many new things, and you'll have to adapt to a new life too." "I'm ready, Dad," Emily said with determination. "We've always been in this together, right? We can do it." Jack hugged his daughter, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. "Yes, my little warrior, together we can do anything." That night, as they Cuddled in their usual corner under a bridge, Jack couldn't stop thinking about Anthony's offer. On one hand, it was the opportunity they had been waiting for years. On the other, the fear of failure, of disappointing not only Emily but also Margaret and Anthony, tormented him. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" Emily asked, noticing the worry on her father's face. Jack smiled weakly. "About the future, honey. About all the possibilities that are opening up before us." Emily cuddled closer to him. "You know, Dad, today when I was looking at Mrs. Margaret's books, I found a phrase I really liked. It said, 'Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that there is something more important than fear.'" Jack looked at his daughter in amazement. "That's very profound, Emily. Do you understand what it means?" Emily nodded. "I think so. It means it's okay to be afraid, but we shouldn't let fear stop us from doing what's right or what can improve our lives." At that moment, Jack felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. His daughter, with her innocence and wisdom, had put into words exactly what he needed to hear. "You're right, my love," said Jack, kissing Emily's forehead. "Tomorrow we'll call Mr. Anthony and tell him we accept his offer. It's time we face our fears and take a step towards a better future." Emily smiled broadly and hugged her father tightly. "Yes, I knew you'd make the right decision, Dad. I'm so proud of you." As Emily fell asleep, Jack looked at the stars peeking out between the bridge beams. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of true hope ignite in his heart. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a new life, a life full of challenges, but also of possibilities. What Jack didn't know was that this decision would not only change his and Emily's lives, but it would put him on the path to discovering hidden truths about his past and facing challenges he never imagined fate had set in motion, a series of events that would shake the foundations of his world and lead him to face the man responsible for his fall from grace. But for now, in the stillness of the night, father and daughter slept, dreaming of a future full of promises and new beginnings. Morning arrived with a promise of change in the air. Jack woke up before Emily, watching how the first rays of sun filtered through. The bridge beams. Today was the day they would take a step towards a new life, and although excitement bubbled inside him, he couldn't help but feel a pang of anxiety. "Emily, honey, it's time to wake up," whispered Jack, gently stroking his daughter's hair. The girl stirred, slowly opening her eyes. For a moment she seemed confused, but then a smile lit up her face. "Today's the day, Dad. We're going to call Mr. Anthony." Jack couldn't help but smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. "That's right, my love. But first, we need to clean ourselves up as best as we can. We want to make a good impression, right?" Using water from a nearby public fountain, Jack and Emily washed up as best they could. Emily even managed to untangle her hair using an old comb they kept as a treasure. With his heart beating rapidly, Jack approached a public phone. He dialed the number Anthony had given him the day before, silently praying that everything would go well. "Hello?" Anthony's voice sounded on the other end of the line. "Good morning, Mr. Anthony. It's Jack from yesterday." "Jack, it's good to hear from you. Have you thought about our proposal?" Jack took a deep breath. "Yes, sir. In fact, Emily and I have decided to accept your offer, if it's still available, of course." The joy in Anthony's voice was palpable. "Excellent news, Jack. Of course the offer still stands. In fact, how about we meet in an hour at the cafe across from the Central Park? We can discuss the details and then go see the property." After agreeing on the meeting place, Jack hung up the phone, feeling as if he were in a dream. Emily, who had been listening attentively, jumped with excitement. "See, Dad, everything's going to be all right." Jack hugged his daughter, allowing himself for the first time in a long time to feel genuine hope. "Yes, my love, I think you're right." An hour later, Jack and Emily were nervously waiting in front of the cafe. When they saw Anthony approaching, Emily squeezed her father's hand. "Good morning." Anthony greeted them with a warm smile. "I'm very glad to. See you. How about we go inside and have something to eat while we talk?" Once seated at a table, with Emily enjoying a hot chocolate and a croissant, courtesy of Anthony, they began to discuss the details of the job and the new life that awaited them. The property is about 30 minutes from the city, Anthony explained. It's a large house with several acres of land. It will need some work to turn it into a functional shelter, but I think it has a lot of potential. Jack listened attentively, nodding. It sounds like a great project. But I must be honest, Anthony. It's been years since I managed anything like this. I'm not sure I'm up to it. Anthony looked at him with understanding. Jack, I understand your doubts. But what we need is someone with heart, someone who truly understands the needs of homeless people. Administrative skills can be learned. In fact, my mother and I will be there to support you in everything you need. Emily, who had been listening silently, chimed in. My dad can do it, Mr. Anthony. He's the hardest working and kindest man I know. Anthony smiled at the girl's words. I'm sure he is, Emily, and you'll be a great help too, right? Emily nodded enthusiastically. Yes, I can help organize things and maybe read stories to other kids who come to the shelter. The conversation continued, discussing details about the salary, responsibilities and plans for the future. Jack felt his head spinning with all the information, but he also felt a growing excitement about the possibilities opening up before them. Well, Anthony finally said, how about we go see the property? That way, you can get a clearer idea of what awaits you. The trip in Anthony's car was a surreal experience for Jack and Emily. It had been years since they had traveled in a vehicle, and seeing the city fade behind them as they entered more rural areas gave them a sense of adventure and new beginnings. When they finally arrived at the property, Jack couldn't help but hold his breath. Before them stood a large colonial-style house surrounded by trees and with expansive grounds stretching as far as the eye could see. Although it was evident that the property needed work, the paint was peeling in some places and the garden was neglected, Jack could immediately see the potential of the place. It's impressive, Jack murmured, while Emily excitedly ran around the front yard. Anthony smiled. Wait until you see the inside. It has more than 10 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and several common areas with some work. It can comfortably house several families. As they toured the house, Jack found himself imagining how each space could be transformed. Here a cozy living room, there a community dining room, over there a play area for the children. And this, said Anthony, opening the door to a room on the second floor, would be your private area. It has 2 connected rooms, perfect for you and Emily. Jack entered the room, feeling a mix of emotions. It was more space than they had had in years, and the idea of having a place they could really call home overwhelmed him. What do you think, Emily? He asked, turning to his daughter Emily, who had been exploring every corner with curiosity, threw herself into her father's arms. It's perfect, Dad. Can we stay, please? Jack looked at Anthony, who was patiently waiting for his response. At that moment, all the doubts and fears he had been harboring seemed to vanish. Yes, it would be a challenge. Yes, there would be a lot of work to do. But for the first time, in a long time, Jack felt they were exactly where they were meant to be. Yes, he finally said, his voice filled with emotion. We'll stay. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. With the help of Anthony and Margaret, Jack began to immerse himself in the details of how to run a shelter. There was so much to learn, from how to handle the budget to how to coordinate with social services and other charitable organizations. Emily, for her part, adapted to her new life with an ease that surprised everyone. Soon, she was enrolled in the local school, eager to catch up with her studies. She spent the afternoons helping Margaret organize clothing and food donations that were beginning to arrive for the future Shelter 1. Afternoon, while Jack was reviewing some documents in the kitchen, he heard laughter coming from the garden. When he looked out, he saw Emily and Margaret planting flowers in a small vegetable patch. Look, Dad, Emily shouted excitedly. We're making a garden. Mrs. Margaret says that when the shelter is ready, we can teach other kids how to take care of the plants. Jack smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. It was amazing how, in such a short time, this place had begun to feel like a real home. However, not everything was rosy. As Jack delved deeper into the financial aspects of the project, he began to notice some discrepancies in the old property records. Anthony, he asked one day, as they were reviewing some documents together, Who was the previous owner of this house? Anthony frowned, as if the question made him uncomfortable. It was owned by a local. Businessman, why do you ask? Jack pointed to some figures in the papers in front of them. There's something that doesn't add up in these numbers. It seems there was a rather sudden property transfer a few years ago, and the values don't match the market at the time. Anthony seemed to tense for a moment, but then relaxed, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Oh, it's probably just an administrative error. Don't worry about it, Jack. Focus on the future of the shelter, okay? Jack nodded, but a feeling of unease settled in his stomach. There was something about Anthony's reaction that didn't sit right with him, but he decided not to push the issue for now. That night, as Emily slept peacefully in her new room, Jack stayed awake, looking out the window at the darkened grounds of the property. He was grateful for this opportunity, for Margaret and Anthony's kindness, for the chance to give Emily a better life. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than they were telling him. What have I gotten myself into? He murmured to himself, not knowing that soon he would discover that his past and that of this property were more intertwined than he could have ever imagined. The next morning, Jack woke up early, determined to move forward with the shelter preparations despite his concerns. As he was preparing breakfast for Emily, he heard someone knocking at the door. Upon opening it, he found himself face to face with a middle-aged man, dressed in an impeccable suit and with a serious expression on his face. "Good morning," the man said in a deep voice. "Are you Jack Thompson?" Jack nodded, feeling a sudden apprehension. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" The man extended a business card. "My name is Daniel Carter. I'm a private investigator. I'd like to ask you some questions about this property and your relationship with the Williams family." Jack felt the ground moving beneath his feet. A private investigator? What was going on? I'm not sure I can help you, Jack stammered. "I've only known the Williams for a few weeks." Daniel Carter looked at him fixedly, as if evaluating him. "Mr. Thompson, I believe there are things about this property and about the Williams that you should know, things that could directly affect your future and that of your daughter." At that moment, Emily appeared behind Jack, curious to know who was at the door. Jack, feeling a protective instinct, kept her behind him. "Look, Mr. Carter," said Jack, trying to stay calm. "I don't know what's going on here, but I have a daughter to take care of and a job to do. If you have something to say it clearly." "Daniel?" Carter looked at Emily and then back at Jack. His expression softened slightly. "I understand your position, Mr. Thompson, but I assure you that what I have to tell you is of utmost importance. Could we talk in private, perhaps later?" Jack hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded. "All right, this afternoon after my daughter returns from school. But I warn you, if this is some kind of deception—" "I assure you it's not," Carter interrupted. "Until this afternoon, then." As he watched the investigator walk away, Jack felt the weight of the world falling on his shoulders once again. Just when he thought things were finally getting better, the past seemed to be catching up with them once more. "Who was that man, Dad?" Emily asked. Gently tugging on his sleeve, Jack turned to his daughter, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "Just someone who wants to talk about the shelter, honey. Don't worry. Now how about we have breakfast? You don't want to be late for school." As Emily ate her breakfast, Jack couldn't stop thinking about the unexpected visit. What secrets did this property hide, and what role did the Williams play in all of this? One thing was clear. The answers he would get that afternoon could change everything. The day passed with an overwhelming slowness for Jack. Every task, every preparation for the shelter seemed to be tinged by the shadow of the impending meeting with investigator Daniel Carter. As the sun began to set, Jack's anxiety reached its peak. Emily returned from school, bubbling with enthusiasm about her day, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. Jack listened with a forced smile, trying to stay calm for his daughter's sake. "Honey," Jack said when Emily finished recounting her school adventures, "I have to meet with someone important this afternoon. Would you mind staying with Mrs. Margaret for a while?" Emily nodded cheerfully. "Of course not, Dad. Mrs. Margaret promised she'd teach me how to make cookies today." With Emily safely in Margaret's company, Jack waited on the porch of the main house the sun was setting behind the trees when he saw Daniel Carter's car approaching down the gravel driveway. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson," Carter greeted as he got out of the vehicle. I appreciate you agreeing to speak with me. Jack nodded curtly. Let's get to the point, Mr. Carter. What is it you need to tell me? Carter looked around as if making sure they were alone. Perhaps we should talk in a more private place. They entered the house and headed to the study Jack had been using. Once there, Carter took a folder out of his briefcase and placed it on the desk. Mr. Thompson, what do you really know about how the Williams family obtained this property? Jack frowned. Not much, to be honest. I know it belonged to a local businessman and that there was a property transfer a few years ago. Why? Carter opened the folder, revealing a series of documents and photographs. Because that property transfer is at the center of a much larger investigation. Does the name Robert Anderson ring a bell? Jack felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Anderson? Yes, I know him. He was the investor who ruined my business years ago. What does he have to do with all this? Carter nodded, as if Jack's reaction confirmed something. Robert Anderson didn't just ruin your business, Mr. Thompson. He's been involved in a series of fraudulent financial operations for years, and this property was one of his possessions. Jack sank into a chair, trying to process the information. But how are the Williams involved with Anderson? It's complicated, Carter replied. You see, Margaret Williams and her late husband were victims of one of Anderson's schemes, just like you. They lost almost everything. But their son, Anthony. Jack felt his blood run cold. What about Anthony? Carter took a photograph out of the folder. In it, Anthony was seen shaking hands with an older, imposing-looking man. Jack immediately recognized Robert Anderson. Anthony Williams has been secretly working for Anderson for years, Carter explained. He was the one who orchestrated the transfer of this property to his mother's name as part of an elaborate money laundering scheme. Jack stood up, feeling a mix of anger and betrayal. No, it can't be. Anthony has helped us. He's given us a chance. Carter looked at him with understanding, and he probably did it with good intentions. But Mr. Thompson, you and your daughter are in the middle of something much bigger and more dangerous than you imagine. At that moment, a noise was heard in the hallway. Jack quickly turned to see Anthony standing in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and guilt. Jack? Anthony began, but stopped when he saw Carter. What's going on here? Carter stood up, facing Anthony. I think it's time you tell Mr. Thompson the truth, Mr. Williams. The whole truth. The silence that followed was deafening. Jack looked from Anthony to Carter, feeling that the world he had begun to build was crumbling around him. Anthony, with slumped shoulders, entered the room and closed the door behind him. Jack, I'm sorry. I never wanted things to come to this point. Is it true? Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. Do you work for Anderson? Anthony nodded. Slowly, yes, but it's not as simple as it seems. Let me explain. Over the next hour, Anthony revealed a story that left Jack stunned. He explained how, after his family lost everything because of Anderson, he had sworn revenge. He had approached Anderson, gaining his trust with the intention of gathering evidence to bring him to justice. But I got too entangled, Anthony admitted, tears in his eyes. Every time I thought I had enough to bring him down, Anderson took a step forward. And then, when I obtained this property, I thought I could use it for something good, to help people like you and Emily. Jack listened in silence, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. And your mother? Does Margaret know anything about this? Anthony shook his head. No, she has no idea. I've kept her out of it to protect her. Carter, who had been listening attentively, intervened. Mr. Williams, I understand your intentions, but what you've done is illegal, and you've put innocent people in danger in the process. Jack stood up, feeling he needed air. I need to think. This is too much. Just at that moment, the door burst open. Margaret entered, her face a mixture of concern and confusion. What's going on here, Anthony? Who is this man? The tension in the room was palpable. Anthony looked at his mother, then at Jack, and finally at Carter. Mom, I think it's time you knew the truth. The whole truth. As Anthony began to explain the situation to an increasingly horrified Margaret, Jack left the room, needing space to process everything he had discovered. He headed to the garden, where the cool night air helped clear his thoughts. What should he do now? Could he trust Anthony despite his lies? And what did all this mean for the future of the shelter? For Emily's future? As if his thoughts had summoned her, Jack saw Emily approaching from Margaret's house, a smile on her face and a plate of freshly baked cookies in her hands. "Dad, look what Mrs. Margaret and I made," Emily exclaimed, offering him a cookie. Jack took the cookie, feeling a lump in his throat. In the midst of all this chaos and disappointment, his daughter was still a beacon of innocence and joy. Regardless of what he decided to do, he had to protect her. "They're delicious, honey," Jack said, forcing a smile. "How about we go for a walk? There's something important I need to talk to you about." As they walked through the grounds of the property, with Emily chattering happily about her day, Jack struggled internally with how to explain the situation to his daughter. How do you tell a child that the world they were just beginning to build might crumble once again? "Emily," Jack began, stopping and crouching down to be at eye level with his daughter. "Do you remember when I told you that sometimes life presents us with unexpected challenges?" Emily nodded, her expression becoming serious. "Yes, Dad. Like when we had to leave our house." Jack felt a pang of pain remembering those difficult moments. "Exactly, my love. Well, it seems we're facing another one of those challenges now." As Jack explained the situation in the gentlest way possible, omitting the darkest details, Emily listened with a maturity that far exceeded her years. "So, will we have to leave here?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack hugged her tightly. "I don't know, honey. But I want you to know that whatever happens, we'll always be together. You and me against the world, remember?" Emily nodded against her father's chest. "I remember, Dad. And I'm not scared if we're together." As they returned to the house, Jack saw Anthony waiting for them on the porch. His face showed signs of having cried, and guilt was evident in his eyes. "Jack, Emily," Anthony said softly, "can we talk?" Jack looked at Emily, who nodded bravely. Together they approached Anthony. "I'm so sorry," Anthony began. "I never wanted things to get to this point. I thought I could fix everything, that I could bring justice and help people like you at the same time. But I was wrong." Jack looked at him steadily. "What's going to happen now, Anthony?" Anthony took a deep breath. "I've decided to turn myself into the authorities. I'm going to confess everything I know about Anderson and his operations. It's the only way to make things right." Jack was surprised by this declaration. "And what will happen to the shelter? To all the people we plan to help?" "That depends on you, Jack," Anthony replied. "Legally, this property now belongs to my mother. She wants the shelter to go ahead, with or without my involvement. The question is, are you willing to stay and continue with the project, knowing all of this?" Jack looked at Emily, who returned his gaze with a mixture of hope and determination in her eyes. Then he thought about all the homeless people who could benefit from the shelter, about the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. "It won't be easy," Jack finally said. "There will be many questions, a lot of distrust to overcome. But if your mother agrees, and if we can make sure everything is done legally and transparently from now on, I think it's worth trying." Anthony nodded, a small smile of relief crossing his face. "Thank you, Jack. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I promise I'll do everything I can to make things right, even from jail if necessary." At that moment, Margaret came out of the house, her eyes red from crying, but with an iron determination in her gaze. "Jack, Emily, I want you to know that no matter what happens with Anthony, you will always have a home here. This shelter will become a reality, and it will be a testimony that even from the greatest mistakes, something good can be born." Emily, who had been listening in silence, stepped forward. "Mrs. Margaret, Mr. Anthony, can I say something?" Everyone looked at her, surprised. Emily took a deep breath and said, "My dad has always taught me that we all make mistakes, but what's important is how we fix them. I think we can do something really good here, all together." Emily's words seemed to dissolve some of the tension in the air. Jack hugged her with pride, marveling once again at his little one's wisdom. "You're right, honey," Jack said. "We're going to do something good here together." As the sun set on the horizon, Jack, Emily, Margaret and Anthony stayed on the porch, united by a strange mixture of sadness, hope and determination. The road ahead would be difficult, full of legal and emotional obstacles, but also full of possibilities. What none of them knew at that moment was that their decision to go ahead with the shelter would attract the attention not only of the local community, but also of Robert Anderson himself. The powerful businessman, upon learning of Anthony's betrayal and the transformation of his former property into a shelter, would begin to use his influence to stop the project. But for now, in the peace of the sunset, Jack allowed himself to feel a ray of hope. Looking at Emily, he remembered the words she had shared days ago. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that there is something more important than fear. With that idea in mind, Jack prepared to face the challenges that would come. The shelter would not only be a home for those in need, but also a symbol of redemption and hope. The following days were a whirlwind of activity and emotions. As promised, Anthony turned himself in to the authorities, causing a media scandal that shook the community. Margaret, devastated but determined, remained firm in her decision to go ahead with the shelter project. Jack suddenly found himself at the center of a storm, trying to navigate between police investigations, questions from journalists, and curious looks from neighbors. However, his determination did not waver. Every morning, seeing Emily's hopeful smile, he found the strength to carry on. A week after the revelations, Jack was in the shelter's makeshift office, reviewing documents and trying to bring order to the chaos, when Margaret entered with a worried expression. "Jack, we have a problem," she said, dropping into a chair in front of him. "The bank has frozen the accounts associated with the property. They say it's part of the investigation into Anderson's activities." Jack felt a knot forming in his stomach. "What does that mean for us? For the shelter?" Margaret sighed deeply. "It means that, for now, we don't have access to the funds we were going to use for renovations and getting the shelter up and running. We're practically at zero." Jack leaned back in his chair, his mind working at full speed. "There must be something we can do. Have you talked to a lawyer?" "Yes, but they say it could take months to untangle this legal mess, months that we don't have, if we want this shelter to become a reality." At that moment, Emily came running into the office, her eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, Mrs. Margaret, you have to see this." The adults followed the girl to the front porch. There, to their surprise, they found a group of people from the local community. Some were carrying tools, others boxes of supplies, and all had expressions of determination on their faces. A woman stepped forward. "Hello, I'm Sarah Johnson, from the Neighborhood Association. We've been following the story in the news and, well, we wanted to help. We thought that if we all put in a little of our time and effort, we could make this shelter a reality, with or without the bank's help." Jack and Margaret looked at each other, astonished and moved. "But why?" Jack asked. An older man, leaning on a cane, replied, "Because we've all been through hard times at some point, and because we believe this. Community can be better if we take care of each other." Emily tugged on her father's sleeve. "See, Dad, I told you together we can do something really good here." With tears in his eyes, Jack nodded. "You're right, my love. You always have been." Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The shelter began to take shape thanks to the collective effort of the community. Where there were once empty and deteriorated rooms, there were now cozy spaces full of life. The garden, once neglected, was transformed into an oasis of peace and beauty. However, not everything was rosy. As the project gained notoriety, it also attracted unwanted attention. One afternoon, while Jack was supervising the installation of new beds in one of the rooms, he received a call that chilled his blood. "Mr. Thompson," said a grave voice on the other end of the line. "This is Robert Anderson, I believe. It's time for you and I to have a conversation." Jack felt the world stop for a moment. How did you get this number?" Anderson's laugh was cold and calculating. "Oh, Jack, I have my resources, but that's not important now. What matters is that you're playing with fire, and I'm afraid if you're not careful, you could get burned along with everyone you care about." "Is that a threat?" Jack asked, trying to stay calm. "Call it a friendly warning. That shelter you're building, it's destined to fail. It would be a shame if all those community efforts were in vain, don't you think? But perhaps we could come to an agreement that benefits us both." Jack gripped the phone tightly. "I'm not interested in any agreement with you, Anderson. What we're doing here is legal and right." "Ah, Jack," Anderson sighed, "always so noble. But remember, nobility doesn't pay the bills. Or protect loved ones. Think about it, I'll be in touch." The call ended, leaving Jack shaking with rage and fear. How dare Anderson threaten him, threaten everything they had worked so hard for? That night, after putting Emily to bed, Jack met with Margaret in the kitchen he told her about. Anderson's call watching the woman's face pale with each word. "My God, Jack," Margaret whispered. "What are we going to do?" Jack looked out the window towards the half-built shelter. "I don't know, Margaret, but I know we can't give up. We've come too far. We've inspired too many people. We can't let Anderson take this away from us." Margaret nodded slowly. "You're right. But we need help. We can't face someone like Anderson alone." "Maybe," Jack began, an idea forming in his mind, "maybe we don't have to do it alone. The community has already shown us their support. What if we bring this fight into the public light? Anderson operates in the shadows, but we can operate in broad daylight." Margaret looked at him, a spark of hope lighting up in her eyes. "What do you have in mind?" "A press conference," Jack said, his voice gaining confidence. "We'll tell our story, the true story behind this shelter. We'll talk about Anderson's corruption and how it has affected so many lives. If we expose his actions to public scrutiny, maybe we can protect ourselves and the shelter at the same time." Margaret considered the idea for a moment. "It's risky. Jack Anderson is powerful and has many connections. It could be dangerous for all of us." "I know," Jack admitted, "but what alternative do we have? We can't live in fear, not after all we've accomplished." As they discussed the details of their plan, neither of them noticed Emily, who was silently listening from the stairs. The girl, with a determination that rivaled her father's, made a decision at that moment she too would do her part to protect their new home and the people she loved. The next morning, while Jack and Margaret prepared to contact the local media, Emily put her own plan into motion. With the help of her new school friends, she began organizing a social media campaign to tell the story of the shelter and expose Anderson's actions. What no one knew at that moment was that the actions of this brave 10-year-old girl would be the spark that would ignite a much larger movement, one that would shake the foundations of Anderson's empire and change the course of their lives forever. As the community prepared to face Anderson and Emily secretly worked on her campaign, Jack faced his own internal conflict. Was he doing the right thing by exposing his daughter and everyone he cared about to potential danger? Or was this the moment to take a firm stand against injustice, regardless of the consequences? The answer to these questions would come soon, and with it, an unexpected turn that no one could have anticipated. Dawn arrived with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Jack woke up before the alarm went off, his mind already racing with plans for the press conference that would be held that afternoon. He dressed silently, trying not to wake Emily, who was sleeping peacefully in the adjoining room. As he went downstairs, he found Margaret in the kitchen. The older woman seemed not to have slept all night, with dark circles under her eyes, but an iron determination in her gaze. "Good morning, Jack," Margaret greeted, offering him a cup of coffee. "Are you ready for today?" Jack took the cup, grateful for the warmth and caffeine. "As ready as I can be. Have you heard anything from Anthony?" Margaret shook her head. "His lawyer says he's fully cooperating with the authorities, but the case is complex. It could be a long time before we have any concrete news." Jack nodded, thoughtful. Anthony's absence felt like a void in the house, a constant reminder of how their lives had changed in such a short time. "Do you think we're doing the right thing, Margaret?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Exposing all of this, it could put not only us in danger, but everyone who has helped us." Margaret put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Jack, sometimes the greatest danger is doing nothing. If we stay silent, Anderson will win. And not only will we lose, but so will all the people this shelter could help in the future." Her words were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Emily appeared, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Good morning," the girl mumbled, heading straight to hug her father. Jack hugged her tightly, feeling a wave of love and protection. "Good morning, my little warrior. Did you sleep well?" Emily nodded, but Jack noticed an unusual gleam in her eyes, as if she were hiding something. Before he could inquire further, the doorbell rang, startling them all. Margaret went to answer, returning moments later with a surprised expression on her face. "Jack, it's Investigator Carter. He says he has important information." Daniel Carter entered the kitchen, his face a mask of professional seriousness. "Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry for the intrusion so early, but I thought you'd want to know this before your press conference." Jack tensed, preparing for more bad news. "What's going on, Mr. Carter?" The investigator took a folder out of his briefcase. "I've been following some leads on Anderson's operations, and I think I've found something that could be crucial to your case." As Carter explained his findings, showing documents and photographs, Jack felt his head spinning. Apparently, Anderson had not only been involved in financial fraud, but also in a network of corruption that extended to the highest levels of local government. "It's incredible," Margaret murmured, leafing through the documents. "With this, we could not only save the shelter, but also bring Anderson to justice once and for all." Emily, who had been listening silently, suddenly spoke up. "That means the bad man can't hurt us anymore, right, Dad?" Jack looked at his daughter, again noticing that strange gleam in her eyes. "That's what we hope, honey. But we still have a lot of work ahead of us." Carter nodded, putting the documents away. "That's right, and you must be careful. Anderson won't give up without a fight. Today's press conference will be crucial." As Carter prepared to leave, Jack accompanied him to the door. "Thank you for all this, Mr. Carter. I don't know how we can repay you." The investigator smiled slightly. "I'm not doing it for money, Mr. Thompson. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Good luck today. I'll be watching." With the new information in hand, Jack and Margaret spent the next few hours preparing for the press conference. They called their allies in the community, reviewed their notes, and rehearsed their statements. Emily, for her part, seemed unusually busy in her room. When Jack went up to check on her, he found her in front of the computer, quickly closing some windows. "Everything okay, honey?" Jack asked, intrigued. Emily nodded with too much energy. "Yes, Dad, I was just doing homework." Jack decided not to push, although part of him suspected his daughter was up to something. "All right, my love, remember that today is an important day. Mrs. Johnson will come to look after you while Margaret and I are at the press conference." Emily pouted. "But Dad, I want to go with you. I want to help." Jack knelt in front of her, taking her small hands in his. "Emily, what we're going to do today is dangerous. I need to know that you're safe, here at home. You help me more by knowing that you're protected." Although Emily seemed to want to argue, she finally nodded. "Okay, Dad, but promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," Jack said, kissing his daughter's forehead. Hours later, Jack and Margaret found themselves in front of a room full of journalists and cameras. Jack's heart was beating hard as he approached the podium. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jack Thompson, and I'm here today to tell you a story. A story of greed and corruption, but also a story of hope and redemption." As Jack spoke, exposing Anderson's actions and sharing his own experience, he could feel the energy in the room change. The journalists leaned forward, eager for every word. The cameras didn't stop recording. Margaret took over, presenting the evidence that Carter had provided. Together, they painted a devastating picture of Anderson's corruption network and how it had affected countless lives. "But today," Jack concluded, "we are here not only to expose these crimes, but to show that there is an alternative. The shelter we are building is proof that, even in the darkest moments, the community can come together and create something beautiful and meaningful." When they finished speaking, the room erupted in questions. Jack and Margaret answered as best they could, feeling more and more confident as the conference progressed. However, their confidence was shaken when a journalist raised his hand and asked, "Mr. Thompson, what can you tell us about the viral video that has been shared on social media this morning? The one showing your daughter Emily talking about the shelter and Anderson's actions." Jack felt the ground opening up beneath his feet. "Video? What video?" The journalist seemed surprised. "Haven't you seen it? It's been shared thousands of times in the last few hours. Your daughter tells the whole story of the shelter and how Anderson has been trying to sabotage it. Margaret, noticing the confusion and growing panic on Jack's face, quickly intervened. "Excuse us for a moment, please." She led Jack to the side of the stage, out of the microphone's reach. "Jack, breathe. We didn't know about this, but we can handle it." Jack nodded, trying to calm himself. "Emily, it must have been what she was doing on the computer this morning. My God, Margaret, what mess has she gotten herself into?" Before Margaret could respond, their phones began ringing simultaneously. It was Mrs. Johnson, Emily's caretaker. "Mr. Thompson." The woman's voice sounded frantic. "I'm so sorry. I only got distracted for a moment, Emily. Emily's gone. She left a note saying she was going to help save the shelter." Jack felt the world stop his daughter. His little Emily was out there alone, exposed to the danger he had so feared. At that moment, as if things couldn't get worse, a commotion was heard at the entrance of the conference room. The security guards seemed to be arguing with someone, and then, to Jack's horror, he saw Robert Anderson enter the room, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Thompson!" Anderson roared. "This ends now!" Jack suddenly found himself at a crossroads. On one hand, he had to confront Anderson and protect everything they had worked for. On the other, his daughter was somewhere in the city, potentially in danger. As the conference room descended into chaos with journalists shouting questions and cameras frantically filming, Jack made a decision. He turned to Margaret, his voice firm despite the fear he felt. "Margaret, I need you to take charge here. Confront Anderson, show the evidence. I have to find Emily." Margaret nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Go, Jack, find Emily. I'll handle this." With one last glance at the chaotic scene behind him, Jack ran out of the room, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. As he ran through the city streets, desperately searching for his daughter, he couldn't help but think about how they had come to this point. What Jack didn't know was that Emily wasn't alone. The brave girl had managed to gather a group of her classmates, and together they were on their way to City Hall, determined to make their voices heard and defend the shelter that had become a symbol of hope for the entire community. Meanwhile, in the conference room, Margaret faced Robert Anderson, years of resentment and pain converging in this crucial moment. The battle for the future of the shelter and for justice itself was about to reach its climax. And somewhere in the city, a little girl with a brave heart was about to change the course of history in ways that no one could have imagined. The fate of everyone hung by a thread, and the next few hours would determine whether truth and justice would prevail over greed, and corruption. Chaos reigned in the city streets. Jack ran desperately, his heart pounding as he searched for Emily on every corner, in every square. The image of his little girl, vulnerable and alone in the midst of this storm, tormented him with every step. "Emily!" he shouted, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by. "Emily, where are you?" Meanwhile, in the conference room, Margaret faced Robert Anderson. The powerful businessman, in his impeccable suit and arrogant smile, seemed out of place amid the chaos of journalists and cameras. "Mrs. Williams," Anderson said, his voice a threatening whisper, "you're making a serious mistake. We still have time to resolve this privately." Margaret, however, was not intimidated. With determination shining in her eyes, she approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice firm despite the trembling in her hands. "What you're about to see is evidence of years of corruption and organized crime, orchestrated by the man present here, Robert Anderson." As Margaret presented the evidence, document after document, the cameras didn't stop recording. Journalists wrote frantically, capturing every word. Anderson, for the first time, seemed to lose his composure, his face paling with each new revelation. Elsewhere in the city, Emily led her small army of classmates towards City Hall. Determination shone in her eyes as she held a sign that read, "The shelter is our future." "Come on, guys," she encouraged her friends. "We have to get to City Hall before it's too late." What Emily didn't know was that her viral video had awakened something in the city. As they advanced through the streets, More and more people joined their march, adults, elderly, other children, all inspired by the bravery of this little girl who dared to face injustice. Jack, following the trail of rumors and sightings, finally heard the clamor of the approaching crowd. His heart skipped a beat when, in the midst of the mass of people, he saw a small figure holding a sign. "Emily!" he shouted, making his way through the crowd. Emily turned at the sound of her father's voice, a mixture of relief and determination on her face. "Dad, you came!" Jack hugged his daughter tightly, tears running down his cheeks. "Emily, my love, I was so worried. Why did you do this?" Emily looked at him, her eyes full of wisdom beyond her years. "Because you taught me that we should fight for what's right, Dad. And this shelter, our new family, is right." At that moment, Jack understood that his daughter was no longer just the child who needed protection. She was a force in her own right, brave and compassionate. "You're right, my little warrior," Jack said, taking Emily's hand. "Come on, we have a city hall to get to." Together, father and daughter led the march to City Hall, the crowd growing with each step. Meanwhile, in the conference room, the situation had taken a dramatic turn. The evidence presented by Margaret was overwhelming. Anderson, cornered, finally lost his composure. "You don't understand," he shouted, his facade of control completely shattered. "I did it all for power, for control. Do you think your little good deeds can change the world? The world belongs to the strong, to those who dare to take what they want." His words, captured by dozens of cameras and microphones, sealed his fate. Within minutes, social media exploded with the video of his confession. It was at that moment that the doors of the room burst open. Jack and Emily entered, followed by a tide of citizens. The already crowded room filled even more with the energy and determination of ordinary people who had decided to take a stand. Anderson, seeing the scene, seemed to deflate. His empire of lies and corruption was crumbling before his eyes. Margaret, with tears of joy in her eyes, hugged Jack and Emily. "You did it," she whispered. "We all did it." Amidst the chaos and emotion, a sudden silence fell over the room as Emily stepped forward. With a courage that astonished all present, the little girl approached the microphone. "My dad always says that a home isn't just a place, but the people who love and care for you," she began, her voice clear and firm. "The shelter we're building isn't just for homeless people, it's for all of us. It's a reminder that together we can do incredible things." Her words, simple but powerful, resonated in the room and soon, throughout the city, through live broadcasts. At that moment, something changed. It was no longer just a fight against Anderson or for a shelter. It was the awakening of a community, rediscovering its power and its heart. The following weeks were a whirlwind of events. Anderson was arrested. His empire of corruption dismantled piece by piece. Anthony, thanks to his cooperation and the testimony of Jack and Margaret, received a reduced sentence and the opportunity to redeem himself. The shelter, far from being shut down, became the center of a community renewal movement. Donations came from everywhere. Volunteers offered to help, and little by little, Jack, Margaret, and Emily's dream became a reality. A month after that fateful day, Jack found himself on the porch of the shelter, watching as a group of children, led by Emily, planted flowers in the garden. Margaret joined him, a cup of coffee in her hands. "Who would have imagined we'd get to this?" Margaret said, a warm smile on her face. Jack nodded, his heart full of gratitude. "Certainly not me. When we arrived here, I was so scared, so unsure. And look at us now," Margaret completed. "We've created something beautiful, something that will last." At that moment, Emily ran towards them, her hands full of dirt, but her face radiant with happiness. "Dad, Mrs. Margaret, come see the flowers we planted." As they followed Emily to the garden, Jack couldn't help but marvel at the turn his life had taken, from living on the streets to leading a shelter that was changing lives, from fearing for the future to being part of building a better one. "You know, Emily," Jack said, kneeling next to his daughter in front of a small flower bud, "these flowers are like us. They started small and fragile, but with love, care, and perseverance, they'll grow strong and beautiful." Emily smiled, understanding the metaphor. "And together, Dad, don't forget they grow together. Like a family. Jack hugged his daughter, looking at Margaret and all those who now formed part of their extended family. "You're right, my love. Together, always together." As the sun set over the shelter, bathing the garden in a warm golden glow, Jack felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. They had faced adversity, they had fought against injustice, and they had triumphed. But more than that, they had rediscovered the power of love, community, and hope. The shelter, which was once the symbol of Anderson's corruption, now stood as a beacon of hope for the entire city. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of human kindness can shine brightly, transforming lives and entire communities. And so, as night fell, and the first stars appeared in the sky, Jack, Emily, and Margaret stayed in the garden, surrounded by their new family, their hearts full of gratitude and their eyes fixed on a bright future full of possibilities. Somewhere in the city, in a cold and lonely cell, Robert Anderson reflected on the consequences of his actions, perhaps for the first time in his life, understanding the true cost of greed and misused power. And in the streets, in homes, in people's hearts, a new story began to be written. A story of redemption, of second chances, of community, and above all, of unbreakable hope. Because in the end, as Jack, Emily, and Margaret had shown, true power doesn't reside in money or influence, but in the capacity of the human spirit to rise up, to care for others, and to create a better world, one act of kindness at a time.